And welcome to what might be our only candidate forum this election season, this particular election season, following the primary. KBRP, about a month ago, invited both mayoral candidates, Mr. David Smith and Mr. Ron Ertley, to join us today. And originally, both candidates accepted our offer. Only at a later time did Ron, Mr. Ertley, decide that he would not like to join us today. We did not want that to stop us from actually doing this forum. We feel it's important to give an opportunity for people to hear what our candidates have to say. Police and fire, much has been made about this area, partly because during the last election process and just after that, there was a lot of talk made about the possibility of a public safety director, the possibility of consolidating or actually farming some of this work out to other public safety officials. And since so many different ideas have been put out there, I was really hoping that we get an opportunity tonight to hear from the candidates about what they would like to see the future be of public safety, both police and fire, under their leadership as mayor. Mr. Smith, can you start with that tonight?
Sure. The quick answer is that I have studied police and fire as a city councilman during the election run-up to city council, and certainly for the last 6 months as a candidate or potential candidate. And I believe that the present system we have, police and fire, is the best system. There had been some questions about, as Ryan just indicated, about farming it out to other agencies, etc. I'll be happy to answer that, but for a direct question from anybody about that. But the reality is, I have no problems with the police and fire as it is. I do, and I'll indicate one point because I've said it several times recently. As a, as a former police officer, I have what I believe is a personal opinion. Remembering I'm only one vote out of 7 on the council, so whatever I think personally doesn't result in change necessarily. But I do have a position on the heads of the departments. I believe firmly that the head of the police department and the head of the fire department should be employees of that department, and that once they retire, they should in fact do just that, retire. And that bringing them back in a position of as a civilian or as an outside consultant stifles the upward mobility and the feelings within the police and fire department of being able to advance. As a young officer, when I went into the police department, I felt that I wanted to advance, and I had that opportunity. Because when we had a chief, they retired and a new person was brought in as that fire chief or police chief, and that allowed for the upward mobility. Presently, we don't have that, and it affects morale. I had this conversation with Chief Raymond just recently, and I indicated to Chief Raymond as an example. I said, Chief, you have a young, your son just came on the police department, about 2 years ago. And I says, does he have aspirations of advancement in the department? And he said, well, of course. And I says, do you realize that if you were to leave and to come back as a civilian, then that takes away a slot that he could occupy at some point because of the lack of upward mobility. And I believe that, I do know that he indicated that he hadn't quite thought of it that way before. And I'm not picking on Chief Raynor because he hasn't indicated that he does want to come back. That was simply a conversation we had.
The second question I have is a sort of a survey of what's out there. Both you and Mr. Ertley have experience. Mr. Ertley as a former mayor of Bisbee, and you as a public safety officer in your job. And so the question is, how does Bisbee match up? And what I mean by that is, how do, as far as public safety goes, cities that are of similar size, have similar sort of areas of population areas, what is your awareness of how those departments are run, and what type of numbers are we looking at with regards to the numbers comparatively to Bisbee?
If we're talking about typically numbers with police and fire have to do with population. And Bisbee's in a very unique position because we have basically 3 separate Bisbees and they're spread out one from the other. And so it makes coverage much more difficult. When I was with the city of Tucson as an example, if we were short in one sector, then the sector I was involved in could swing over and take care of that sector. When we have 2 officers on duty here and we have 3 wards, it becomes very difficult. Obviously, one of those officers can't be in one of those wards at a certain time. And so there's a response, which is we're very, very competitive when it comes to response times in Bisbee, certainly with fire and with police also. Many cities are now indicating that a good response time is 7 minutes, and ours is in the area of 3, which is certainly a good thing. And so with that, you know, if it's not broken, we don't want to fix it. But I, as mayor, would certainly be constantly looking at some of these areas, because that would be my responsibility as helping with the budget and the fiduciary responsibility of the city. Some areas are getting away from just looking at population, and they're looking at geographic area. And with geographic area, our people fit. The number of people we have fit quite well. If we were to look at population, then one would say we have too many public safety personnel. I personally am not an advocate of that position at this point because of our geographic change.
Well, with regards to that, I think that one of the things that has been put forth is the idea of keeping things the same, or maybe even increasing them. At least during an interview that I conducted with all of the candidates prior to the primary election, one of the thoughts that was put forth was that we actually needed some additional public safety officers, specifically police officers. However, what is one of the things that you would like to see done differently under your administration if in the realm of public safety?
I have concerns for the safety of our public safety people. Their job is public safety. At the same time, I have concerns for their safety. And most of those concerns revolve around the fact of training. If one looks at our budget, we'll see that we have training dollars in our budget, and yet year after year after year, those training dollars are not spent, and they're turned back. And it's easy for department heads to be happy when they turn budget dollars back, because it makes their area, their individual department look good. But when we're talking about training, we're talking about safety, particularly the fire area. And in the police area, we're often talking about education of new case law that will alleviate potential legal responsibilities of the city. There are changes in the law constantly that our officers have to be kept up to date on. And if we don't send them to school, they're not going to be able to be kept up to date on these. The fact is the money's in the budget, it's not being spent. Quite honestly, I want it spent.